Hello. In this section, I'm going to tell you how I do the little brown circles now that I have all of my hearts stitched to my background piece. So these little circles are referred to as pennies, and that's because they used to use a penny or a coin to cut the circular shapes. But we have so many different options, so many different size circles. So I have found that when I work on some of my projects, I just love to stack all the different circles. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the other kits that I have. This is Penny Matte Modern. Try and get a little close for you. Oops, there you are. So you can see by stacking all the different sizes of circles and adding different stitches, I'm really able to have a lot of fun and make a really great little project out of it. So that is Penny Matte Modern number 1, and this is Penny Matte Modern number 2. Again, lots of stacks of circles, and then Penny Matte Americana. So I just love all those red, white, and blue colors. So pretty. So let's do our brown circles on our My Valentine project. We'll get our little glue pen. Just put a little circle of glue in the middle. Remember, we don't want to put glue too close to the edge where our needle's going to pass through. It makes it just a little more difficult to stitch. If you do get glue in all the way out to the edge, you'll notice it'll just be more difficult, but you will be able to stitch through it eventually. So I have my brown floss and my needle. I'm ready to go. Now I want to tell you a little bit about our challenges with circles. There's not a whole lot of space here. Now this is a 1-inch circle. But as you get down to the smaller circles, like the white circle that's going to go in here, it's real small to work with. You may find others that will instruct you to, for example, stack your small circle onto your brown circle, stitch it first, then put your brown circle here, stitch it. But I find that working with really small pieces makes my hands very uncomfortable. They get a little crampy. So I like to put my circle right onto my background. But I will have the challenge of fitting my stitches around in a small, tight circle. I don't want my stitches to look like they're on the diagonal. I want them all to look like they're the spokes on a wheel. I'm going to start from the background, come up through the edge, along the edge of my brown piece of wool felt, take my first stitch. Now since it's a small circle, I can't take quite as big of a 1/4 inch stitch, so it's a little smaller than that. What you have to think about is when this circle goes on top, how much of that stitch are you really going to see? It's too hard to make them real teeny like that, so part of them will be covered up, as you can see in the one that I've stitched here for you. So there's my brown stitches underneath, then my white on the top. It all looks pretty in the end. So let's stitch that circle on, keeping my floss out straight. You're going to be turning your work more often because that circle is so small. And you want to get around that edge. So I'm kind of working up high closer to the camera so that you can hopefully see. But what I often will do when I'm stitching a small piece is I'll actually lay it down on my work surface. I'll take my stitch and I'll continue. And I'll rotate as I need to. And I'm always looking to make sure that those stitches are going out from the center, straight out instead of on a diagonal, and have them look like the spokes of a wheel. Continue around the edge. If your stitches get a little longer, they're a little uneven, I wouldn't worry about it too much. That little white circle is going to cover them, and they're all going to look the same anyway in the end. There's a very small little amount of the brown that shows. So by stacking these little circles, adding a little button to them, it's just enough detail to make the project finished and a little more interesting. So continue around until you get almost to the end. space those stitches out so they look nice and even. A couple more to go. There's one more here. And of course I'm going to join my last stitch to my first, tuck my floss underneath. I'm sorry, put my needle to the back, take a bit of a knot, bury the tail, and then snip. Alright, so our brown circle is done, a little brown penny. And so now I'm going to put white floss on my needle. So every one of our Grab and Go kits comes with its own chenille needle. And you'll find that you're going to accumulate a few, which is kind of nice because you can keep your needles and then have different colors of floss threaded through, ready to go. Keep them in your little pincushion, and then you don't have to stop and rethread a needle each time. So, got that knot here. Here's my little white circle. It's going to go right in the middle of that one. Take my little glue pen, give it a little dollop of glue. Now this glue looks pink, but it is going to dry clear with the air. The color is just to show you the glue as you're applying it, so don't worry about that purple or pink showing through, it's just fine. Some of them are blue. This is a Fons and Porter pen. Their glue refills are blue. That was a Soline refill, I think, that was pink. They're all effective. Use what you have. And now I'm going to come up through the brown background, because the brown is now the background to the white circle. Alright, now when I'm stitching through the white, I want to make sure that I catch part of my background. It's easy to have those stitches float only onto that top piece of wool felt, but they won't be anchored down to your project unless they go through the background that they're on. So in this case, the white has to stitch through some of the brown wool felt. It does not have to go down all the way through to the backing of our project. I'm sorry, our background of our project, but it does need to catch a bit of that brown wool. I'm just about to take a stitch and I'm realizing I'm making a mistake, which is great. I'm going to show you what's happening here. If I keep pulling this, you'll see this stitch is on a diagonal. That's because I forgot to leave my thread underneath the new loop I made. So if that happens, you just stick your needle under that loop and fix the stitch. And with moving the project around, that can happen a lot, so these little circles are a little tricky. I do like to work flat on my surface, as I mentioned earlier. Just makes it a little easier for me. Take and move it around. Sometimes if I'm using a really small circle on top of another, doing a blanket stitch around the edge is really kind of tough because they're so small. Sometimes I use a little half-inch circle. So in that case, I will use a spider stitch. That's just a little stitch that looks like the inner spoke of a wheel. I come up through the center and I just go stitching out from the center. You'll see that in some of our other projects. I just thought I'd mention it now that we're doing circles. And here is my last stitch of the white. I want to join to my start stitch and then go down to the back. Now this I can go all the way through to the backing. On the other side I can make a knot and just travel my floss through the felt. Snip it and we're good. Alright, so now we have two little stacks. We'll continue to put the rest of them on there, and then I'll show you how to sew the backing to your project to cover all those stitches. Let me just talk about these buttons first. So these are teeny tiny little heart buttons. They are included in your kit. You place them in the center of the white. Now you can have your hearts pointing in or pointing out, whatever you prefer. It's kind of cute to have them all go in the same direction. Whatever you decide is up to you. You're going to use your red floss to stitch those down. Get my needle here. And this is just a stab and stick kind of a needle, button. There is no shank, there's just two little holes. We're just going to stab up and down and sew it just a couple of times. It's not a functional button, but we do want it to hold to our project. Thread my needle. Oops, the wrong end. There we go. Put a knot. And then just hold your button in place. Sometimes you can put a little bit of glue on the back of the button, and that helps it a bit. So it doesn't keep sliding around. So there, got my button on there. I'm going to come up through the back. And you got to kind of stab and poke around a bit until you come up through the hole in the button. And then you go down through there to the other one. There's a lot of layers we're going through, so give it a nice good stab. Now the eye of the needle will go through the button. It's not that big of an eye, so you're fine. And then you kind of stab it again, so you can bring it up. Sometimes it helps to look on the back to see where your previous stitch was. There we go. And then another, and that's just fine. I'll pull that through. If you notice, I don't use a thimble. I'm just one of those stitchers that don't use a thimble. If you do, please go right ahead and use your thimbles. It would help to stab that needle through a bit of all those layers. So I just don't, I'd rather just stab my finger, I guess. So I tie a knot off on there, snip my thread, and we'll snip a little bit more of those red threads so that they're not too wild and sticking out and shadowing through on my white background. Alright, so there you have it. You got your little button on top of your penny stack. Your hearts are stitched in place. I'm going to end here, finish doing my circles, and then I'll show you how to attach your two pieces together with a nice blanket stitch around the edge.